Welcome everyone to the Preschool Mindfulness Summit. I'm really excited to introduce you to Dr. Layla Mason. She is coming to us from Sydney. She was on our Mindfulness in Education Summit back in May and has kindly agreed to come on to the Preschool Summit this year. And she's going to give us tips on calming your preschooler nutrition and lifestyle. So Dr. Mason's a consultant pediatrician who specializes in nutritional and environmental health for children with chronic illnesses, ADHD, autism, spectrum disorders, anxiety, which we know is something I know the viewers are really interested in. She's the author of the bestseller Children's Health A to Z, and she is a fellow of the Royal Australasian College of Physicians and the Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thank you for having me on your show again. I think it's a wonderful thing you're doing.
Thank you. So we have a freebie for you. If you click the freebie box below, there's a series of checklists so you can find out if your child or somebody in your class might be having any of these ailments, or look at different things that Dr. Mason's going to talk about today. And then you can also click on her speaker bio to learn more about her websites and her social media and things. So let's start with the question, how do you know if a preschooler, maybe in your class or your own preschooler, if they have something like ADHD, or if they're just, energetic, and what's the difference, and how can we diagnose such young kids?
Well, that's a really interesting question that I'm confronted with many times every week, because I think we expect a lot from our children at younger and younger ages. And the truth is, you cannot diagnose ADHD in any child under 5 years of age. It's just because the behaviors that are the definition of ADHD are actually perfectly age appropriate for younger children.
Right.
So if a 3-year-old bounces around and doesn't concentrate for more than a few minutes on an activity, that is perfectly normal for their age. Not every 3-year-old does that. Of course, there are children who concentrate for longer, but as you know, there's a wide range of normal in development. And I always like to think of what were we evolved to live like. We, as hunter-gatherers and even, early farmers, we spent most of our times outdoors being very active. And nowadays, we cram children into small childcare centers, and even if they have an outdoor area, it's often quite regimented when they're allowed to go there and how much time they can spend there and what they're supposed to do there. It's all very strict, and children need, I think, more freedom and especially more physical activity. Yeah. And children who are allowed to be very active usually are calmer. Right. And there are many reasons for that. I mean, one is that if you're active outdoors in green environments, there's a lot of research on that now, how playing in green spaces makes children calmer, makes them concentrate better at any age, and even makes them more creative in their problem solving. And secondly, if you're outdoors a lot, you probably are exposed to more sunshine, and you make more vitamin D. And vitamin D is really important for making the neurotransmitters that make you happy and calm. Right. And thirdly, if you're spending a lot of time being active, you sleep better at night. And if you sleep well at night, you're going to be happier and calmer the next day. So it's just, our lifestyle is really, really important for how we act and feel and behave. Now, in my practice, I do see children who come in and pull out every single toy out of the shelves, and just throw them on the ground, don't play with them, and they're just really hyperactive. And I would say that is probably not normal, but then I have to look at why, are these children maybe completely sleep deprived, Or did they just have a very sugary snack just before and are hyper on sugar? Because that affects your gut flora, and your gut flora, as we are learning more and more so every day, is very much in control of how we feel and behave. Or is this child maybe, zinc deficient or iron deficient or vitamin D deficient, So there's so many reasons why a child could behave like that I don't rush to label the kid, but first really do a little bit of detective work to find out what may be the underlying cause for their behavior, and then address that underlying cause. And most kids then within a few weeks are much, much better and calmer and happier.
Wow. Yeah, I love what you said, because I think I see so often kids get labeled when they're, 2 or 3 years old. And I'm always thinking, as you said, like some of the behavior maybe just seems like what a preschool child is supposed to do. I love what you said about really digging in there and looking at the whole child and all those different aspects that might be affecting a child that's especially hyperactive or energetic. In Italy, they always say, "Oh, vivace, vivace," which the children are so lively. That's what they used to say about my older daughter when she was young. Is different what people say in different cultures as well. I think.
Absolutely, and I think that's also important to remember, that cultures are different, and that what's considered perfectly normal and pleasant in one culture is considered not normal in another one.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about food additives, because we hear a lot about, processed food and how some of the additives might affect a child's behavior. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about any of the latest research around food additives and what we might look out for in preschoolers.
Yeah, I think really food additives are the number one thing to start with when you're trying to figure out why your child may be hyperactive or aggressive or unhappy. And I have so many stories of preschoolers being really wild. And sometimes the parents have already made the connection and say, when my child has an orange lolly, they go wild. They climb the walls and they're so hyper and just, unmanageable. What do I do? And of course, the first recommendation is don't give them yellow lollies. Avoid the yellow coloring, which is the 102. And it's not just in lollies, it's also in a lot of, chips and other processed foods.
Okay.
And there are other additives that can have the same effects, like preservatives. So the 102 and the 202 are really well researched. 102 is a yellow color and 202 is a preservative in many, many foods. And there is very good research to show that some children become incredibly hyperactive and uncoordinated and just difficult to manage when they have that. Yeah. And there are a few explanations. One is that those additives are actually considered by the body as toxins. Okay. And so they're treated the same way as other toxins are when you ingest them, and that is your body's trying to get rid of them. And our body uses zinc for that. So you use 4 molecules of zinc to get 1 molecule of those toxins to grab it and eliminate it. Wow. Now, if you're already low in zinc, which is quite common in many children, especially children who have been sick a lot with ear infections or sore throats or skin infections. So they have already used up a lot of their zinc, and then they're getting a dose of this toxin and their zinc levels just drop very, very suddenly, and they just have no reserves left. And you need zinc for being calm, for making the neurotransmitters that make you happy, for being actually just for brain processing. You need it. You need it for your frustration tolerance. You need it for not having huge tantrums. So you have to remember that these additives are not put into food for our benefit. Yeah, they're not making the food more nutritious or in any way better. They're just making it they prolong the shelf life so that they can be, rather than real food, which goes bad within a few days, you can sell this food for years. And it's put in there like the color to make it more attractive, especially to children. Children like bright colors, so they're more likely to want a yellow lolly than a brown lolly. They're not going to beg their parents for something that is just a bland color, even if it tastes exactly the same. So I think the number one thing to do for all children, and this, of course, preschoolers who are hyperactive or, irritable and so on, but I think it's really should be done for every single child, is avoid all the additives. They are nasty, they're not good for us, and they can do a lot of harm. A lot of them cause oxidative stress. And when you have oxidative stress, you can imagine that it's like rusting, like internal rusting. It's not good for us. And there are another one apart from the 102 and 202, and I have the whole list on that checklist that you can download. So really go through it, take it when you go shopping, and just make sure none of those are in the food you buy for your children. And of course, ideally, you just buy fresh food, which doesn't have any numbers. But there is also a antioxidant in a lot of breads that are sold at the supermarkets. And these antioxidants make it much more, prolong the shelf life as well. And it's called propionic acid. And I've had patients, young preschool kids, who were perfectly fine, just normal behavior, no issues ever, started preschool and became wild. And only on the days when they went to preschool. So, of course, sometimes we think maybe it's the stress of starting preschool, maybe it's, the environment, who knows. But in several kids, we figured out that it was that they were starting to eat bread on the preschool days because that was the easiest to give them at the snack, with that propionic acid. And it's also very well researched that can really make children wild, really angry and difficult. And these are, children that the parents know their children and said that my child is not like that. Right. And as soon as you stop giving them this propionic acid, they're fine again. So really that's the number one thing for me, is to look at food additives. And of course, most of the foods that you buy that have food additives in them are not that great. It would be much better to give your child a carrot and some red pepper and, a healthy sandwich rather than something with additives in it or packaged little chips or things like that. Now, I have to say that there are even healthy foods that have preservatives in them. So, for example, hummus, if you don't look very carefully at the ingredients, some of them will have the 202 in them, and some kids will react to that. And sometimes the reaction is mild, not driving them up the wall, but just interfering with their ability to concentrate. And of course, we want them to be learning at preschool and having fun and, enjoying it. And if they just kind of have like a brain fog, they're not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that, just what effect these things have on our bodies. It's actually scary. I think more and more people are trying to go towards the fresh food and non-processed food and things, because we're becoming more aware of all these things. So can you tell us maybe about some foods that are good for kids, that are calming, and might help a child that's having some difficulties?
Yeah, so I would say that as a mineral, the most calming mineral is magnesium.
Okay.
Magnesium really chills you out, helps you if you're anxious, helps you sleep, just, relaxes your muscles. It's really wonderful. And foods high in magnesium, you can Google it and get long lists, but the main thing I always recommend is if there is no nut allergy in the family, have 1 handful of nuts a day. So whatever the size of the person, their size of the handful, because they contain a lot of magnesium, sesame seeds as well. And then foods like broccoli and black beans, they're very healthy. Now, so magnesium, fantastic. And you get it through food easily, but only about 40%, at least of Australians and Americans, get enough magnesium in their diet. And that's because they don't eat enough of those foods, especially vegetables. And there is another problem with that, is that, if we don't eat enough fiber, which is in fresh vegetables and fruit and whole grains, our gut flora changes completely, and we at the beginning of last century, we ate about 100 grams of fiber every day, and now we eat about 20 grams on average. So it's reduced a lot. And of course, we know that over those 119 years now, a lot of chronic illnesses have surged. There was hardly any type 2 diabetes or hypertension or obesity 120 years ago. And now, of course, the larger part of the population suffers of some chronic illness. And it starts in childhood already. We have obese children, we have children with autoimmune diseases, we have children, of course, with behavior issues and so on. So eating a high fiber diet is really, really important because it changes our gut flora, and our gut flora changes our immune system and how our whole metabolism works. So I would say number one thing is eat more vegetables. Yeah, that's really it. And if they are fresh vegetables, or they can be frozen, but without any processing involved, they are super healthy. And of course, kids also need other things. They need fats and they need protein and so on, but vegetables are the most important thing.
Yeah.
And then, there are other minerals that are really, really important to get into a child. So zinc and iron and omega-3 and so on. But I would say for calming, number one is magnesium.
Definitely. Yeah. So it's really interesting what you said about the change in human, food consumption and how that's resulted in so many autoimmune and chronic illnesses. And I moved, I think I told you, country to country, and that's one thing that really stands out to me. I live in Portugal now, and people tend to eat very fresh food, lots of vegetables, very simple food, and it's, so it's good. Whereas when I lived in Canada, it was, you just go in the supermarket and it was all really processed, packaged, little Lunchables and all kinds of things. It's just like, you just notice it right away in different countries. So and then you look at the people and you can see the difference in health and things. So really.
That's, my husband is American, and I remember when we went to Germany, where I'm from, to visit. Yeah. I said, oh my God, in America you have 100 different cereals to choose from. Here you only have 10. Yeah. And I said, none of those 100 cereals are actually necessary or healthy. Be much better to just have oats, plain oats, than any of those sugar-laden cereals. And it took him a while. We've been together 24 years now, but he's learned now. He doesn't buy the packages anymore.
Yeah. So really, really interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about this outdoor play and being in nature. You mentioned it earlier on that there's obviously a lot of benefits, and we're seeing, I keep reading, well, both sides really. You read about in Finland, and it doesn't matter if it's -20, the kids still go outside to play in the snow and things. And then a lot of times we are hearing in the States, they're canceling recess, and kids are staying inside because it's, there's a lot more testing and things going on, or the teachers maybe don't feel that they have the time, or a lot of parents worried about their kids going outside in the rain or getting wet, things like that. So can you just comment on that and tell us maybe a bit about your opinions and the research on being in nature?
Yeah, we are definitely evolved to being in nature, right? Not indoors. So, but I think as a society, in some countries, again, more than others, we're becoming overprotective and overcautious about having our children exposed to the elements. Now, in in New Zealand, where I lived for a long time, they say there's no bad weather, there's just bad gear, bad clothing. I mean, children with a good raincoat can go out in the rain, with rain boots, and kids with good snow gear can go out in the snow. I mean, you don't want them to freeze to death. Of course not, But the research really shows that children who do go out more get sick less often. And there is now a trend in Europe for these forest kindergartens where their kids in preschool actually do not go to a preschool center anymore, but they meet at a forest and they spend the whole morning or afternoon or sometimes the whole day in the forest all year round. And in the winter in countries like, if they're in Germany and it's really freezing cold and they need a place to warm up, they have maybe a little wagon or something where they can go in and warm up, and but they spend almost their entire time outdoors playing in nature, and they become so much more creative because they don't have plastic toys to just stack up. They actually build things with sticks, and they're very active. They're running around, and they are healthy, those kids, and they're getting more vitamin D as well, which is great for their immune system. So this is a trend, and all of those preschools are actually booked out. You can see that parents want that. Not every parent, obviously, but many parents really want their children out more and actually fight with the preschools and say, you have to take the children out to the park every day. You have to take them, let them out. I mean, I think the next step after that would be a preschool that has a nice big garden and lets the kids decide where they want to be. And if you look at those preschools, the kids are usually outdoors, so they tend to spend much more time outdoors than indoors if they have the choice. And I like that, letting them decide rather than saying now it's half an hour for the 3.5-year-olds to go outside and play on the equipment, and then you have to come back in and, play in the door's corner. I mean, it's much more natural for them to be outdoors, and it is better for them to be active. There was a saying, sitting is the new smoking, that is a bit over the top. Smoking is still a lot more harmful than sitting, but we don't want kids to sit a lot. We want them to be active. We want them to be running and jumping. It helps them develop their gross motor skills. The more they develop their gross motor skills, the better their fine motor skills will be. And, the better those skills are, the less frustrated they get. If it's easy for them to draw and later on write, they are happier than if they struggle, right? So, and it all starts very early on. Yeah. So I think, and then of course there is the calming effect of nature. Which there's a lot of research going on that, especially in Japan. They call it forest bathing. So when you're anxious or when you're stressed, you go into the forest and you bathe in the green and you just go for a walk, and try it out. You will feel happier and calmer when you come out. And in children, most children, if you take them out into nature, you get them also away from their gadgets. May not be so important in a preschooler, but I see a lot of preschoolers on phones already or iPads. But, in older kids, my kids are teenagers, it's so nice to get them away from their computers for a few hours. And it takes an hour or so, and then all of a sudden you see the switch and they become calm and happy, and they get into that zone of being in nature. And we used to do that when they were little already, started a long time ago. I have to say the one problem I had was one of my children was magnesium deficient, and I didn't know it. And he got sore legs. Every time we went for a walk, he started screaming, until I realized that he was actually getting sore legs. Right. And I gave him, more magnesium-rich food, and from then on, he was happy to go for walks. Yeah. So that's one thing. If your child really hates going for walks, make sure they get enough magnesium. Okay. And if you're struggling with the food, which of course is the best way of getting it into them, but you can give magnesium transdermally. And there's a trick. You just put some magnesium salts in their bath water. So Epsom salts or magnesium sulfate, just a cup of that in their bath water, let them soak for 15-20 minutes, and they actually absorb the magnesium through their skin.
Oh, great.
A little shortcut.
I know.
Eating the broccoli.
Exactly. Great points and tips there. And I know the forest schools are, becoming popular really all over the world. People are trying to adapt what they're doing in those Scandinavian countries or in Germany and other parts of Europe. And I've seen some pop up in Canada and other places as well. So obviously, we're starting to realize that we need to go back to a more kind of natural lifestyle without all the processed food and not staying inside and looking at our screens. So let's talk a little bit more about the screen time, because this is a huge debate in preschool classrooms, whether there should be iPads and technology in the classrooms and at homes, where sometimes it's used just to as a distraction. So maybe parents are cooking dinner or something, so they give their child an iPhone to play around with. So what do you suggest in this case, and also the parents? I think this is another issue, is parents being very distracted by always looking on their phone and not being really present with their child.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good place to start as yourself. If you have your phone next to you at the dinner table and you keep checking it every time it bings, that's not setting a great example. And it's actually not good for you either. So I think it's important to have really gadget-free zones in the house. I think it's very important to turn off the Wi-Fi at night so nobody can get on. I mean, in preschool it's probably not such a big problem, but it's good to have this, media-free time. And I think we should stick to the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which has gone up quite a bit. It used to be absolutely no screens under 3 years of age. Because of the research, it shows that the more time kids spend on screens before they're 3 years of age, the higher the risk of getting a diagnosis of ADHD later in life. So now it's a little bit different. They say, under 2 only if it is like a Skype call or a FaceTime call, where you see another person or looking at photos. And then after that, an hour a day. And then when they get older, a bit more. I mean, I think it is a difficult question, because this new generation obviously is going to be using digital media and digital stuff for everything they're going to do. And, my children didn't get a computer until they were about 10, which I thought was very late. Or was it 12? I don't remember, but I thought it was very late. But it's, now looking back, I think, you know what? Maybe that was too early. But they use these computers the way we maybe learned, we use books. I mean, we used to look things up in books. They are so good at it. They are like native speakers of the digital languages, right? I know. You don't want to deprive a child of that, but I think they learn it so quickly and so fast and so naturally that you don't need to worry that if your child doesn't have an iPad when they're 3, 4, or 5, that they're not going to catch up. It's not that difficult to learn to swipe and to touch and to, and as I said, my kids got their computer at 10 and they didn't have phones or iPads, anything like that. And they are amazing. They can program, they can do everything. So you don't need to start at 3 or 4. The other thing is that what you need to learn at that early preschool age is social interaction. And you're not going to learn that from a screen. So maybe it will teach you to read. Maybe, I know some people are teaching their kids to program at 4 years of age. I don't think they need to learn that at 4. What they need to learn is to be kind, have empathy, to be able to get along with people, to have fun with people, to interact socially and appropriately. And no screen will teach them that. So it is much better for them to, maybe, I know it's hard. I have, my own children, but if you can involve your children, like when my kids were young, I had them sitting on the kitchen floor and they were banging on the pots and they were, and I had a few blocks there for them or a box to put things in. And it wasn't as easy as if someone had looked after them separately, but, they were very good at doing the things that they were doing on the floor while I was cooking, or when they got a bit older, they helped me a little bit, never enough, but they got the idea at least. And, rather than them shoving them in a different room and putting them in front of a screen, which is, distracting, it makes life easy, but it's not the best thing for their brain. And I think, the more we can, in this world nowadays where everybody becomes with every year more distant from other people. I think it's more important to have them close to you and have them there, and you can chat to them while you're cooking, and you can talk to them, and you can sing to them, you can explain to them what you're doing, so many opportunities to interact. And, I mean, when I think about my childhood, I was born in Pakistan, and in Pakistan, people just visited each other. When it was afternoon time, there was a certain time in the afternoon when people just dropped in on each other. And then I grew up in Germany where people called each other. And my mother always said, oh, this is just so unnatural. Why don't you go and see your friend? Why would you talk on the phone? And nowadays, people don't even talk on the phone anymore. It was text messages for a while, but now it's even not that anymore. Now you just put a photo on Instagram and that's it's becoming more and more distant. So I think we need to kind of counter that with what we do with our preschoolers. So, the more we can get them to interact socially, the better.
Yeah,
and
totally.
That means no screens.
I have to agree. I think all those skills that you mentioned about developing empathy, compassion, kindness are I think that's really the key. If we can teach young kids to do that, and to enjoy being kind and helping others and being kind to themselves, that will actually change the world for the better while we go through this huge technological change in society. So you touched a little bit about sleep with the technology, but tell us a little bit about why sleep is so important for preschoolers, and if you have any tips to help young kids get a better night's sleep.
Yeah, so sleep is absolutely essential for being happy and for a functioning brain. And we do know from studies that if you just wake a child up half an hour earlier than their usual wake-up time, and you perform an IQ test on them, they will perform significantly less well. So they'll look like they're not as intelligent as they were a previous time when they had enough sleep. So sleep really, really interferes with how well you're thinking and performing, but also how happy you are, and how irritable you may become if you're tired. So sleep is important. In our sleep, our brain cells clean themselves. They get rid of the toxins that they may have accumulated throughout the day. Melatonin is a very, very strong anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, and melatonin is produced when it is dark and when we're sleeping in our brains. So whatever we can do to increase melatonin production will help, and will help the child sleep. So what is that? To get melatonin production, first of all, you have to be out in natural daylight during the day. So maybe not easy in the depths of winter in Sweden, but almost anywhere else you can get out. Even if it's winter, you will get some sunlight or some daylight. Even if it's filtered through the clouds, that's enough. And then as it gets late in the evening, gets dark, you want to avoid especially blue light. So you don't have to turn off all the lights in the house, even though if you have a child who really doesn't sleep well, it may be good to have dinner by candlelight rather than neon light. Right. But the most important thing is to turn off all the screens for at least 2-3 hours before the child is expected to go to sleep. Because the blue color from screens stops your brain from producing melatonin. It goes through the eyes, into the brain, into the pineal gland, and you don't produce melatonin. So you need to come off those. Now, in older people, some people put an app on their computer or their phone. The f.lux app, for example, turns the screen orange when the sun sets, and then you don't have that blue light. Some people even wear orange goggles. But I think in preschoolers, we really shouldn't do that. We should take them off all the screens, and ideally most of the time, but especially from like 2-3 hours before they go to sleep. And that ensures that they will produce melatonin, which will make them sleepy, and they'll want to go to sleep. Now, the other really, really important thing is, I think, to set a kind and predictable and calm routine, bedtime routine. My children actually always liked going to sleep. I breastfed them to sleep when they were little, and then when they were older, I lay down with them for a little time and we talked, and they enjoyed that. They never ever fought going to sleep because it was always nice. It was, special time with mommy. So I think, not making it, I get you out of my life now, or it's a punishment even, you go to bed now, but really, continue that empathic kindness that you're trying to instill in your children, very important. And not giving them, a dinner that would, wind them up, like a lot of sugar or those additives we talked about that will make them hyperactive. I find that chamomile tea is very, very calming. And most kids in Europe grow up on chamomile tea. Now I realize why. The parents want their kids to go to sleep. So a cup of chamomile tea after dinner will really just reduce any kind of hyperactivity and maybe anxiety. So that's a helpful thing. The Epsom salt bath can be a really good extra tool there to calm children before bedtime. And sometimes, a bit of a massage or a foot massage, any kind of stroking or touch definitely increases endorphin levels in the child, which calms them down. And there was just recently a nice study that showed that if you stroke, this was on babies, but it's still true for preschoolers, if you stroke them at a speed of 3 centimeters per second, which I thought was interesting that they measured the speed, it reduces pain and calms them. So this was a study on when they were actually doing some blood test or something on the baby. So they were testing them for pain, but it is also true just for calming them enough to go to sleep. And there's like this trick on the foot. If you stroke the inside edge of the foot at that speed approximately, very calmly and gently, kids will go to sleep. So that's my secret little weapon.
That's a great tip. Oh, thanks for sharing all those really practical ideas. So just before we finish today, do you want to share anything else, maybe your 3 top tips for parents to take away from this session in helping their children to be more calm?
Well, I think we talked about nutrition, how important it is to have a whole food diet, that is healthy and full of magnesium and all the, and good fiber. And we talked about sleep and we talked about exercise. One more thing that I would add is breathing.
Okay.
So, when a child breathes badly, and that's usually mouth breathing, they overbreathe and they're not going to have as restful a sleep at night. And during the day, they will also not actually be as relaxed as a child who breathes properly, which is through the nose. Okay. And I think that's a really important thing to look at. Yeah. So we know that breathing problems really have an effect throughout the lifespan. In adults, the sleep apnea, makes people actually die younger, has a really bad effect on their heart. And, it can be treated just by breathing properly rather than putting CPAP machines on and surgery and all those things. It's a matter of learning to breathe properly with the tongue positioned at the top of your palate. And if you think about children, their faces grow really fast and they actually change depending on how the child breathes. So if a child breathes through the mouth, the tongue is at the bottom. And then they get these long faces and they get crowded teeth because the teeth, the jaws are narrow. They don't have enough space for all the teeth. And then you spend thousands of dollars in orthodontics later. Whereas a child who breathes through their nose, the tongue is actually at the top of the palate and pushes the teeth apart so that they get this nice wide jaw that has enough space for all the teeth. And the palate is going to be nice and wide rather than arched and high. That means there's enough space for the sinuses to develop and not become too narrow and, and congested. And also, the nose actually has millions of little hairs or cilia that filter the air. So when a child breathes through that, any dust mites or pollen or anything a child may be allergic to gets caught there and comes out again. The cilia kind of have this movement that pushes it out. Mm-hmm. Whereas if a child breathes through their mouth, all that goes straight into the body and causes inflammation and congestion, and then that's actually that vicious cycle where they then cannot breathe through their nose, but they can learn it. So the more we can do for children to teach them to breathe properly through the nose, the calmer they will be and the better it is for their overall health. When you think of panic attacks, people hyperventilate and then they get panicky, right? And we do see that sometimes in children, that they just breathe too fast. If you watch your child breathe at night, if they're breathing through their mouth, they're probably breathing quite fast, and then they may have breaks where they stop breathing, which is not good either. Mm-hmm. Whereas when they breathe through their nose, they breathe very gently and regularly. Really, really important. So I think breathing is a very important one. And in order to breathe through your nose, you have to have good muscles. These muscles have to be strong to keep your mouth closed. If you have really low tone, you're like that, right? So, and how do we get those muscles? We get them from breastfeeding and then from chewing our food and from talking a lot, from smiling. Yeah. So really important to do those things. And my other tip that I think is a good one, maybe not working for everyone, but get a dog. Dogs, a lot of research that if you have a dog, you sleep well, even especially children, if they're anxious at night or they're having trouble, have a dog with them in bed and they will sleep well. Dogs are great for the immune system. Kids who grow up with dogs as preschoolers have less allergies later and less asthma. And dogs are also just calming. For kids who are anxious or kids who are hyperactive, dogs are amazing. They're really the best calming, cuddly toy. It's not a toy, of course. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. The cuddle animal. Yeah. So it worked for my children. We got a beautiful Labrador, Benji, when they were little, and they always loved having him in their bed. They were fighting on who would get him, and then they would all three sleep in one bed. Right. So and there's a lot of research out on dogs as companion animals and as calming children and older people, of course, as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've been reading some things about animals as well and how, with anxiety with children. So it's interesting that you said that. So thank you so much for sharing all those amazing practical ideas. We have lots of people on today talking about breathing and showing different breathing exercises, so that ties in nicely as well. But I want to thank you for sharing all those really practical things that parents and teachers and anyone working with kids can look into if they think that a child may need extra help, or I think all children really need these things, don't they? So thanks again for sharing. And I just remind everyone that you can download the checklist by clicking the freebie list, and you can find out more about Dr. Mason by clicking the speaker bio, and you'll get to her website and social media and learn about her book, which was probably a great resource for anyone working with kids. So thank you so much for joining us.
Lovely talking to you. Bye-bye.
Bye.